After 12 years of marriage, I thought I knew my wife. But the night she tore up our wedding photo and called me a pathetic failure, I realized betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. While she plotted her escape with her ex, I quietly planned a reckoning so complete it would leave them both begging for mercy, and me finally free. Tom Mitchell never thought betrayal would come wearing the face he trusted most. For 12 years, he and Claire built a life in Austin, Texas. They'd weathered miscarriages, layoffs, the slow deaths of parents. Tom believed all of that had welded them together. Even when Claire's mood swung from laughter to resentment in a single evening, he convinced himself that was just how real love worked. Imperfect but worth the effort. Until the night she finally stopped pretending. It was a Thursday, late in the evening. Rain tapped the kitchen windows while Tom stirred a pot of noodles on the stove, Claire's favorite. When she walked in, he expected the usual exhausted hello. Instead, she didn't even look at him. Her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes fixed on some invisible point behind his shoulder. "I'm moving out," she said flatly. Tom turned, spoon in hand. "What?" "I'm moving in with Jordan." The name meant nothing at first. Jordan who? She didn't flinch. "My ex Jordan Matthews. The one I should have married in the first place." The words landed like a punch he hadn't braced for. His mind rushed to remember any mention of a Jordan. There were none. "I've been seeing him for months," Claire continued, her voice too calm. "The late nights, the business trips, all lies. I'm done pretending." She walked over to the shelf lined with framed photos. One by one, she pulled them down. Their wedding day, a vacation in Colorado, the ultrasound that never became a child. She held up their wedding photo, studied it for a moment, then tore it in half without looking at him. "You're a pathetic failure, Tom," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "He's the love of my life. You were just a way to fill time." He gripped the edge of the counter, steadying himself while the rest of the room seemed to shrink. He opened his mouth to speak, but a new voice cut in. "Let it go, Tommy," said Tricia, Claire's older sister, stepping into the kitchen doorway. She looked pleased with herself. "She's too good for you." The three of them stood there in silence. For the first time, Tom saw the truth in their expressions. They'd planned this together, rehearsed it, maybe even laughed about it when he wasn't around. His first instinct was to shout, to demand explanations, to ask how long he'd been the idiot in the middle of their charade. But he didn't. He set the spoon down, took a slow breath and said only, "All right." Claire blinked, as if surprised by how easily he'd surrendered. "If that's what you want," he continued, his voice steady, "then we'll do it your way." Later that night, Tom signed every document she handed over. The separation agreement, the papers taking his name off the mortgage, permission for her to keep the car until she moved out. She smiled when he signed the last page, a thin, satisfied smile that told him she thought she'd won. But she didn't understand what was already in motion. 3 weeks before that Thursday, Tom had stopped believing her excuses. He'd watched her fake warmth, had seen how she slipped her phone into her purse the second he walked into a room. He noticed how she left in the evenings with no clear destination and came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. So he started paying attention. He checked her phone bill online. The number listed under Rachel Yoga appeared almost daily. Claire hated yoga. He compared the number to their cell provider's records. It belonged to Jordan Matthews. One night, while she slept, he logged into their joint accounts. She'd been moving money, small transfers at first, a few $100s every other week, into an account he'd never seen. That was the moment he understood she wasn't just planning to leave. She was preparing to drain everything they'd built together. Instead of confronting her, he called Scott Ellison, a lawyer who'd worked with him for years. "I think my wife is setting me up," Tom told him. Scott didn't sound surprised. "How much proof do you want before we act?" "All of it," Tom said. "And I want to make sure I walk away clean." They worked quietly. Tom began collecting evidence. Screen captures of her transfers, recordings of late-night calls, captured through an old baby monitor app she'd forgotten was still installed on her tablet, and every receipt showing the house's down payment came from the inheritance his mother left him. He didn't do any of it out of spite. He did it because he knew Claire would feel entitled to everything, and he refused to be left penniless by the woman who was already calling him a failure. In the days that followed, Tom traced every piece of the puzzle. Jordan Matthews wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a man with debts piled higher than his dreams. 2 failed businesses, overdue child support, and a pending fraud investigation. The last detail almost made Tom laugh. Claire thought she was trading stability for romance. She was really trading it for a sinking ship. By the time she confessed, Tom had already decided he wouldn't stop her. He would let her walk straight into the life she thought she wanted. And when it fell apart, because he knew it would, he wouldn't be there to save her. He'd be free. He signed the last document, closed the folder, and watched her smile as if she'd finally won some private war. She never suspected she was only winning the first battle. The war had already turned. Tom had never thought of himself as a calculating man. But the day he realized Claire was preparing to erase him from their life, something in him changed. All the years he'd spent trusting her, making excuses for her moods and vanishing acts, seemed ridiculous in hindsight. Once he saw the evidence, the hidden account, the daily calls to Jordan, he stopped imagining he could reason with her. She'd already left him in every way that mattered. She just hadn't packed her bags yet. So while Claire kept up her performance, Tom built a plan. His first step was to protect the one asset that mattered most: the house. Technically, their names were both on the deed, but the down payment had come entirely from his inheritance. He still had the transfer records from his mother's lawyer, proving the money had never been part of any shared marital account. He and Scott met twice a week, quietly working through the details. "If she's funneling money," Scott said, "we have grounds to restrict access to certain funds until we determine if it's marital or individual property." Tom nodded. "I don't want to fight in court. I want this clean. I want her to think she's getting what she asked for." Scott tilted his head. "You're sure you don't want to confront her now?" Tom didn't hesitate. "No. She's been rehearsing this exit for months. If she believes she's in control, she'll never see the rest coming." While Claire played the devoted wife in public, Tom traced every transaction. She'd started small, $200 here, $300 there, hoping he wouldn't notice. But over 6 months, it added up to thousands she planned to walk away with. Tom also hired Ben Ramirez, a private investigator he'd worked with years earlier on a background check for a business deal. Ben had a reputation for efficiency and absolute discretion. "I need everything on Jordan Matthews," Tom told him. "Past, present, whatever you can get." Within 3 days, Ben delivered a dossier thick enough to confirm every suspicion Tom had. Jordan Matthews had never held a steady job longer than 2 years. His first startup had failed after he took out loans under false income statements. He'd been sued twice by investors who claimed he'd misused their funds. His second business folded within 18 months, leaving behind tax liens and unpaid contractors. More recently, Jordan had been living in a small apartment in Round Rock, barely scraping together rent. His child support payments were 6 months overdue, and the state had an active investigation into his finances. None of this surprised Tom. He'd watched enough of Claire's decisions over the years to know she was drawn to the idea of escape more than any actual future. After reading the report, Tom printed out every page and prepared an anonymous package addressed to Tricia. He knew she was the closest person to Claire. If she was stupid enough to trust Jordan's promises, she deserved to see the truth before she lost everything. Before he sent it, Tom decided to do one more bit of research. He searched Jordan's name on Facebook. The account was public. Jordan posted motivational quotes about manifesting success, photos of dinners he clearly couldn't afford, and the occasional rant about how no one believed in his vision. One post, dated only a week before, read, "Manifesting a second chance in life. The next chapter is about to begin." Tom almost laughed. Claire had thrown away 12 years of partnership to chase a man who could barely hold on to his own credit score. He dropped the envelope off at Tricia's office on a Wednesday afternoon. No return address. No note except a sticky tab on the first page. Make sure your sister reads this before she signs anything. He drove away without looking back. At home, Claire was unusually affectionate. She wrapped her arms around him and said she hoped they could end things without bitterness. She had no idea the file with Jordan's history was already sitting in Trisha's inbox. The next phase was the financial firewall. Tom sold the house quickly, listing it below market value with an old friend in real estate. The offer came in less than a week. Claire, convinced she'd soon be splitting a six-figure profit, signed the paperwork eagerly. What she didn't realize was that her half of the sale had been pre-cleared for tax obligations and legal fees associated with the transfers she'd hidden. By the time her share reached her account, it was a fraction of what she'd expected. Tom made no effort to explain. A week later, while he was packing his own boxes to move to a short-term rental, Claire called him. "This can't be right," she snapped. "The deposit is way too low. Fix it." He answered calmly. "Everything's fair. Ask your lawyer." She didn't have one. She hadn't thought she needed one. Tom ended the call without another word. That night, Claire sent 3 more messages. One insisted he was punishing her out of spite. Another claimed he'd regret humiliating her. The last was almost pleading, "I trusted you to be decent." Tom didn't reply. In the days that followed, he watched from a distance as the cracks in her plan started to widen. The first sign was a voicemail from their old real estate agent. Claire and Trisha had shown up at the house, expecting to move in. They were shocked to find the locks changed and a new owner living there. Then came the emails. Claire's tone shifted from smug to desperate. "Jordan's card isn't working. His car got repossessed. He says he needs a little help until he can get back on his feet. You need to send the rest of the money." Tom read the message twice, then deleted it. He already knew Jordan was running out of options. He'd followed him once, out of curiosity, and watched him slip into a pawn shop. Later, Tom confirmed what had been sold: Claire's diamond bracelet. She hadn't noticed it was missing yet, but she would. Tom didn't feel pity. He felt clarity. For the first time in years, he wasn't trapped in her chaos. And he had no intention of rescuing her from the mess she'd chosen. Tom knew the implosion was coming, but even he underestimated how fast it would unfold. He didn't have to lift a finger. He'd already set every piece in motion, and now he just watched as the consequences caught up to Claire and Jordan. It started 3 days after the house sale finalized. Tom was working late when he received a call from Melissa, their former real estate agent. "Tom, I have to ask, did you promise Claire she could keep the house?" "No," he said. "Why?" "They showed up here, Claire and her sister, insisting you told them they could stay until they found a new place. They tried to walk in." Tom felt a distant amusement. "I never promised her anything." Melissa hesitated. She looked shocked, like she really believed you'd let her stay. Tom thanked her and hung up. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about the look on Claire's face when she realized her plans were built on assumptions. That was only the beginning. 2 days later, he received the first of many frantic emails. Subject line: "WTF is going on?" It was from Claire. "Jordan's bank account is frozen. His car was repossessed this morning. He said he just needs a little help, Tom. You have the rest of the house money. Please send it. We can work this out like adults." He read it once and archived it without replying. He knew exactly what was happening. He'd followed Jordan the week before to a pawn shop on the east side of town. Watched him walk out with cash in hand. Watched him make a call from the parking lot, probably to Claire, promising everything was fine. It wasn't fine, and Tom wasn't about to step in. The second blow landed when the file he'd left for Trisha finally did its work. Trisha, always eager to flaunt her sister's new life, had bragged at her law firm that Jordan was a brilliant entrepreneur about to close a big funding round. She'd even referred him to a client developing an app. Tom knew it was only a matter of time before someone checked the facts. When they did, everything unraveled. Trisha was called into a partner's office. The firm had discovered Jordan's fraud investigation and eviction records. Her credibility was in question. She was suspended pending review. At 2:14 a.m., Tom's phone buzzed with a long text. "I don't know what you sent or did, but Claire is crying nonstop. My firm is threatening to fire me. Please, Tom, just help us clean this up." He muted her number. He didn't feel vindictive. He felt finished. By the following week, Claire's messages shifted tone entirely. The anger was gone. All that remained was panic. "Tom, please, we can't get approved for an apartment. Jordan's accounts are frozen. He says we can't pay for the storage unit. I don't know where we're going to stay. Just send enough to get through the month." He didn't reply. Jordan had already decided to accelerate the collapse himself. Tom hadn't expected the final twist to come from Jordan's own vanity. Apparently, Jordan believed he was destined to write a memoir about his life, something he'd been recording voice notes for over the past year. One of those recordings was a conversation he'd captured without Claire realizing. In it, she laughed about how she never really loved Tom, that she just waited for something better. Trisha could be heard agreeing, calling Tom predictable and pathetic. Jordan had posted the clip to a private Facebook group of old college friends, probably as proof he was finally winning. One of those friends still liked Tom and forwarded the recording. Tom listened to it twice. He didn't feel angry, just relieved that any lingering regret he might have carried was gone. He downloaded the file, attached it to a blank email, and sent it to Claire's mother. He didn't add a message. That single act triggered the last stage of collapse. 3 days later, he got a text from Amber, his cousin, who was still in touch with Claire's family. "Everything's falling apart. Claire's parents kicked her out. They're disgusted. Trisha lost her job. Jordan disappeared last night with whatever money they had left. Claire has nowhere to go." Tom read it in silence. He closed his laptop and poured himself a glass of water. It struck him how quiet his new place was compared to the house he'd left behind. No shouting, no tense silences, no pretending. He thought he might feel triumph. Instead, he felt nothing at all. The final message came late that night, from Claire herself. "I don't know where else to turn. I'm sorry. I was stupid. You didn't deserve any of this. Please just talk to me. We can figure something out." Tom didn't respond. He'd made his choice weeks ago. He would not be the one to lift them out of the disaster they'd created. For the first time in over a decade, he wasn't responsible for fixing anyone's mistakes but his own. He turned off the phone and set it on the counter. Outside, the city moved on without them. The weeks after Jordan disappeared were strangely quiet for Tom. He'd moved into a furnished condo on the east side of Austin, a place he'd rented under his own name alone. No shared leases, no joint accounts, no reminders of what he used to call home. He didn't tell many people where he'd gone. Only a few friends and his cousin Amber knew how to reach him. He wanted it that way. While Tom settled into his new life, the collapse of Claire's plans gathered speed. It started with the bank notices. Claire hadn't understood that the hidden transfers she'd made, moving thousands in small increments to her private account, were technically fraudulent because she'd misrepresented them as household expenses. When the bank flagged the withdrawals, the tax office got involved. A lien was placed on her remaining funds. Tom's lawyer confirmed there was nothing Claire could do to reverse it. The evidence had been gathered legally, and she'd signed every document herself. Then came the eviction. Claire had been renting a short-term unit with Jordan, believing they'd have enough savings to last until he found a new job. But when he vanished, the payments stopped clearing. One afternoon, she came home to find the locks changed and her belongings boxed on the curb. Trisha tried to help at first, but her own problems were too big to ignore. She'd been formally terminated from her law firm after they concluded she'd used her position to push a business referral without due diligence. Her professional license was under review, and she was living off her savings, unable to find new work while the investigation remained open. Tom heard all this secondhand from Amber. He didn't ask for updates, but Amber sent them anyway. Almost as if she needed to know, he understood how completely the situation had unraveled. A month after the final text from Claire, Tom received a letter forwarded from his old address. It wasn't handwritten. Claire had typed it, probably hoping it would look more formal or persuasive. The letter was 5 paragraphs long. She apologized for humiliating him, for lying, for taking money she hadn't earned. She wrote that she'd believed she was chasing real love and freedom, but in the end, she'd only discovered how little Jordan valued her. She said she was living with a friend temporarily, trying to figure out her next steps. She ended with a line Tom read twice to be sure he understood. "If you can find any compassion left for me, I would be grateful. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do need help." Tom folded the letter neatly and placed it in a folder with the others: emails, printed texts, notes. Evidence of how thoroughly Claire and Tricia had underestimated him. He didn't respond. 3 days later, he opened his personal email to find another message from Tricia. Subject: "I don't know what else to do." She wrote that she was facing possible disbarment and couldn't afford to keep up her mortgage. She blamed Jordan, the firm, and even Claire for the fallout, but she didn't mention her own decisions. "Tom, you've always been practical," she wrote. "Please, if there's any way you can help me stabilize until I find work, I'd be grateful." Tom read it twice, then deleted it. He knew if he replied, even with anger, he'd be pulled back into the story they were still trying to rewrite in their favor. He had no interest in participating. 2 weeks passed. Then came the final encounter. It was Sunday afternoon, the only day Tom allowed himself to fully unplug. He turned his phone on silent, ignoring messages from clients and the occasional curious friend. He was halfway through a book when he heard a knock at the door. He waited a moment, hoping whoever it was would leave. But the knock came again, softer this time. When he opened the door, Claire was standing in the hallway. She looked exhausted, thinner than he remembered. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She didn't speak right away. "Please," she finally said, her voice hoarse. "Can I come in for a minute?" Tom didn't feel pity, only a quiet detachment he hadn't known he was capable of. But he stepped aside and let her walk in. Claire stood near the kitchen counter, taking in the unfamiliar space. She didn't comment on it. Instead, she took a slow breath. "Jordan left in the middle of the night," she said. "He took everything. My laptop, the little money I had left. He even stole my phone." Tom waited. I don't know what I thought," she went on. "I guess I believed you'd always be there if it fell apart." He didn't reply. Claire's shoulders sagged. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need help. I don't have anywhere else to go. My parents won't take me in. Tricia's barely speaking to me." Tom studied her, trying to remember the woman he'd once loved. He couldn't see her anymore. "Did you really think I'd fund your life after everything you did?" he asked quietly. She wiped at her cheek but didn't answer. Tom set down his glass. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even sad. But you don't belong in my life. You made your choices. You can live with them." Claire looked up, eyes wet. "Please, just one more chance." He shook his head. "When you tore up our wedding photo, that was the last part of me that would have ever said yes to you again." For a moment she didn't move. Then she nodded, as if she'd expected this all along. She walked to the door. "Goodbye, Tom," she whispered. He didn't answer. When the door clicked shut behind her, he felt nothing but relief. This time there would be no second chance. 9 months later, Tom no longer thought much about Claire. The life they'd shared had faded into something that felt more like a long, unhelpful lesson than a marriage. He'd kept only what mattered. The records showing he'd never been the villain she claimed. The proof he hadn't lost his sanity when he started to suspect she was planning her escape. Everything else was gone. The condo he'd rented became permanent. It wasn't big, but it was enough. No reminders of arguments, no obligations to fix someone else's mistakes. He worked from home most days, consulting for the same clients he'd built over a decade, and spent the evenings however he wanted. No phone calls he had to answer. No apologies he had to make for things he hadn't done. Sometimes he thought about the last time he'd seen Claire standing in his doorway, hoping he'd still be the man who would save her. He'd wondered afterward if he'd feel regret, if he'd question whether he should have helped her find her footing again. But as the months passed, he only felt relief. He hadn't responded to any of the messages she sent afterward. Not the first email thanking him for hearing her out. Not the second, asking if they could meet as friends. Not the last, which was only one sentence long. I wish things had ended differently. Tom never replied. He donated most of the wedding gifts they'd stored in the attic. He sold the last piece of jewelry he'd ever bought her, a bracelet she'd worn on their 10th anniversary, and used the money to fund a scholarship in his mother's name at the community college she'd loved. That was the one thing that made him feel proud. His mother had spent her life reminding him that decency wasn't weakness, that you could be kind without letting people walk over you. He didn't do any of this as revenge. He did it because it was time to stop carrying a story that had never really belonged to him. From time to time, Amber sent updates about Claire and Trisha, though Tom never asked for them. Trisha's legal career never recovered. The investigation into her misconduct had closed, but her reputation was in pieces. No firm would hire her. She'd moved back into her parents' house. Claire bounced between short-term rentals and friends' couches. No stable job. No real plan. The last Tom had heard, she was applying for a customer service position that barely paid enough to cover rent. None of it made him feel vindicated. It just confirmed what he'd finally learned. The people who treat you like an option don't get to decide when you forgive them. One afternoon, he powered on the old backup phone he'd kept locked in a drawer. It took a moment for the notifications to load. When they did, the screen filled with unread messages, 19 in total. Some were from Claire. Some were from Trisha. A few were from Claire's mother, who had once called him family. They all sounded the same. Regret, confusion, pleading for help. Tom read none of them. He powered the phone off again and put it away. He'd spent years trying to prove he was worthy of respect. Years trying to fix problems he hadn't created. In the end, nothing he did had changed their view of him until he stopped trying. People who betray you often believe they'll always have a way back in. That no matter how far they push, you'll still be there to clean up the mess. What they don't expect is the day you decide you're done. Tom didn't celebrate. He didn't post about it online. He didn't feel triumphant. He just moved forward. He joined a running club, started taking cooking classes, reconnected with friends he'd lost touch with while trying to hold his marriage together. He found that life felt simpler when he wasn't worried about whether he was enough for someone who never saw his value. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about the man he'd been, willing to give everything, convinced that loyalty was the same as love. Now he knew better. He'd learned that respect mattered more than shared history, that love without honesty was worthless, and most importantly, that leaving quietly was the most powerful choice he could have made. One evening, he stood on his balcony, watching the city move on below him. For the first time in years, he felt no urgency to fix or prove anything. The silence wasn't empty. It was freedom. If he could have sent a message to the version of himself who stayed too long, it would have been simple. You don't owe anyone the chance to hurt you twice. And sometimes the real victory isn't in getting even. It's in never looking back.